I'm hoping that I'll have people here today at 10:30, um, September 12th, on my course dealing with adult development and aging. And I hope that you'll be able to learn something that may be of some use to you, okay? Sometimes it's fluky. Zoom is fluky, so I will try to hope everything will be good. And we'll see if there's anybody else here. It doesn't say anything about anyone being here. So we have a recording. All right, good. So my name is Antonio Cardona, and I'm your instructor. And I wanted to have at least a get together so that people would know me, and I would get to know a little bit about you. You may have some questions. Online is, as I'm sure you realize, a different animal than showing up at a class. I don't know which one is easier or which one is harder, but it's really just a different modality. It's a different way of learning. Um, so this course that has to do with human development and aging, I think it's an interesting course. That's a self-serving bias, as it's called in psychological jargon. I'm interested in it because I think that we all age, and I'm aging, and you're all aging. I know you don't want to hear that. You're all youngums, okay? Um, young whippersnappers, if you will. And so it's good to know about this topic in any event, all right? So I'll try to answer any questions. This is the first of some times that we'll get together online. Want to do that not all the time and not necessarily every week, because I think otherwise you'd go to class, right? But like maybe every other week, something like that. And I'll send an announcement out so that you know. Okay. I tried this morning. I don't know if mornings work well for most of you. It doesn't work for everybody. I know that. So I'm open to exploring that in the near future. Okay. So this course is about aging, and that's an important concept that we study in psychology. All you can see and hear me well enough?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So you should feel free to ask me any questions if you hear something that I say that you'd like me to say something more about, to clarify. If I don't know, I would try to find out and get back to you. Okay, so adult development and aging is the topic at hand. Gerontology, which has to do with people aging, the scientific study of aging, of maturing from youth, if you will, to older age, more mature, is what this is all about. Okay, and so we're going to learn a little bit about that. So kind of a new topic, if you will, or not maybe new topic, but a new focus and a new interest in psychological areas and sociological areas and even political areas, because the older folks, if you will, have not always been given as much attention as in the recent past. And there is a reason for some of that. Um, the country is going to be significantly mature, if you will. Somewhere between 20 and 40% of the census will be like that. So the census, the US Census that we're interested in, which is different than everyone else's census, but is very similar to everyone else, China, um, Canada, and other countries, suggesting that they're having to grapple and be concerned about their populations aging, if you will. Okay. Did you know that? No? Anybody? No, no response? Okay. So I hope you're listening. I hope that this will be a topic of some interest to you. So something that comes up and in the readings is the topic of aging. Okay. And what is it? Um, aging is a form of discrimination in the work setting. It is workplace discrimination based on a legally protected category. So age in the federal and the state and in cities and counties and other kinds of government, including schools, if you will, is a type of discrimination. Okay. So it's actually illegal. Okay, so I just wanted you to know that that's something that we need to be concerned about. That aging is a topic that we will be talking about. Okay, and that really covers most of uh, the discussions that we do throughout. So you'll learn a little bit about lifespan um, perspective, if you will, as it's called. What are the features that have something to do with that, and how humans age, if you will. All right. I already mentioned that this is the study of scientific sociological aging, uses the scientific method where we identify questions, where we talk about how to measure what we're talking about. We operationalize terms. That means we specifically define what those terms are. And we do research that we gather information, we do statistics oftentimes, and we then publish those findings, and we share them within a scientific community and within a socio-cultural community, such as yourselves, as students, so that we can learn about what it is that we are trying to address and how to make it better. And we do that, then if I do some research and you do some research and others do some research, then we can learn from each other and do a better job at handling this topic. Okay, so gerontology is a study of people that are aging, and science comes to help us with that. And the lifespan perspective helps us with that. And that perspective looks at humans from two perspectives, from early childhood and adolescent, okay? And also looks at them from a later mid-age, if you will, and older age. I would say that I'm mid-age. A couple of people come up in this topic. Paul Baltes, he is a researcher and he's done a lot. There's been some studies, particularly in Seattle, that have to do with longitudinal studies about aging. Okay, so I just wanted you to at least be aware of this. Um, Aging is multidimensional, it's not simple, and everyone ages on their timetable, if you will. Okay, things that come up in this uh, area is a term that often comes up in psychology called plasticity. Doesn't have anything to do with plastic, but it has to do with the malleability. And humans tend to be very malleable. I think that and you've probably experienced people, maybe someone in your family, who had a stroke. Okay, and strokes are a common issue that comes up as people age. Not everyone gets them, and not everyone gets the same version. But what does happen is that people that get strokes often get better. We send them to physical therapy because what? Doing helps you. And that's one of the things I think you learn in this course that might be a takeaway. So, what do you learn about aging? Well, that if you exercise and you try to use your abilities better, by walking, by exercising, by reading, by studying, by thinking, you're going to be better off. So, anyway, getting back to the people that have strokes, we learned that those people who have strokes will get better when we give them physical therapy. And of course, everyone does it a little bit different. And I think it's a good thing. Okay. So I wanted you to know that the topic of plasticity means that the brain is malleable. And we talk about the brain, though there are other items and things that have to do with how you mature, but the brain is the one that we mostly talk about in a topic in a place like this, if you will. Okay. All right. So I've already mentioned some of the people that talk about aging, and they suggest that there are age-related reductions that are not as prevalent and as super, if you will, as other people think. Some people say, "Oh, getting old is terrible," and it isn't the greatest thing, but there are a lot of good things that come from aging. Not only are you not like a young, uneducated, and uninformed person, but you are far more informed and you gain wisdom, if you will. So, those are some good things. There are other things, of course, being able to be independent of your parents, if you have parents. All right. So, those are things that show up. But there are things that show up, some declines. And again, I want to suggest to you that some of those declines have to do with the particular person that is experiencing them. All right. All right. The other thing that I'll say, since I already mentioned age discrimination, that tends to be quite a bit unspoken, microaggressions, sometimes they're called. So we mistreat some of the older people, we ignore them, we might not serve them when they show up for, let's say, in a restaurant. We might not look at them when they walk by. They might be invisible. So that's a way that we live in society that we may not be fully aware that we're doing that. All right. And I'm not blaming anyone here or anything like that about that. It's just a normal thing that happens. But when we gain insight into that we might be doing that, so I'm going to challenge you to think about how you might do that when you are somewhere, and when you see someone who has so-called gray hair, if you will. Um, how you might be doing that and how you might learn to uh, handle working with these people a little bit better, if you will. Okay. Anyway, this course is about those factors, and that there is an old age unfriendliness, and we want to have an old age friendliness developed in our society. And we're getting better at that because we are actually including, if you look at television, you'll see that there's a lot more people that are older. Not sometimes it's stereotypic, if you will, but you'll see that they're including more, and to be included is good, if you will, even if it's not a perfect scenario. And society is never going to be perfect. I know you don't want to hear that, but that's true. It isn't. All right. So some of the characteristics of older population is that we know from demographers, if you will, that there's a trend. There's an aging trend. There is the population pyramid that you probably saw in the textbook. It's a graphic technique that illustrates how it looks that some areas are aging. And I was actually listening to a video the other day about like the country of France and Spain, which is different than us, but how the center of the country has lost its youth. And now most of the people, if you look at France, there is an area that if you draw a line right through it, certain miles, that area is going to be more older people, and that the people are going to be living in the shores, not unlike the United States, where people live in the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, and people live where else? Well, they live in Chicago, they live in Miami, they live in California's LA area, and so on, San Francisco, and what have you. So that's a common occurrence. Okay. So I just wanted to point that out to you. Okay. So there is an element of diversity in elderly people. Not only are elderly people increasing, but they're increasing in the so-called ethnic groups. There's more older people in Blacks, Hispanics, and Asian cultures that are among the groups that we usually study and think about in this country. All right. The other thing also that I think is important is that there are more women that are aging. And in fact, it turns out to be, demographically speaking, that women tend to outlive males. I know those of you that are males don't want to hear that, but that's something we have to grapple with. All right. So anyway, most countries are dealing with the need to adapt to make policies that have to do with that. And even China, who doesn't like to admit to anything being wrong in their country, is grappling with that. All right. So that's I think important to realize. All right. So what else can I say? Well, there are some forces of development that are find themselves in us. The biological forces, the genetic forces, and the health-related factors that influence us. There are psychological factors, internal, perceptual, cognitive, emotional, and personality types, if you will. Social cultural forces, okay? And the lifespan forces that have to do with life cycles, okay? So, everyone ages gracefully in their own way. So the first factor is interpersonal and intrapersonal. So within me and others, right? The big change in terms of how I age is really self, if you will. How does my age self? Okay, so biology, psychological, and social cultural changes occur in people. Okay. Some influences have to do with how people mature. We study that, scientifically speaking, using cohorts. Cohorts are just groupings, if you will. You've probably heard of Gen Xers and and people like that, Generation Z, that kind of stuff. The baby boomers, among others. These are really sociological constructs to help us understand it. Doesn't mean that people that we define in those groups have all the same qualities. They have some related qualities. Okay, so normative age graded influences is what it's called. Normative history graded influences and non-normative influences occur in people. All right, so culture is a part of that. And what is that? That's really just we learn what those values are, what orientations we are, the beliefs of our way of living, if you will. Okay, and that's important to this study because aging doesn't occur in a vacuum. It occurs in a culture, right? And I already mentioned ethnicity, and that's an important concept. And of course, people's gender, if you will, is also important, okay? If you will, okay? All right, there is what's called interactionality. That means that all these forces combine, and we need to keep that in the back of our mind, okay? So if I asked you what age is, what might you say? Do I hear anybody? Anybody? No?
Age is something that you develop with another person as you grow together.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So age um, is the thing that happens in terms of entropy, if you will. We call it entropy in science, where things go and developed from an organized fashion to sometimes a lesser organized fashion. And some people have suggested that aging is about disintegration of people. And I guess there's an element of that, okay? But age has a couple of ways of being looked at. The primary age, what is it that I am? I am how old? Years old, okay? That's my primary age. My secondary age is, what's happening to me as I age that might be related to things that are happening to me biological, including maybe some things that are limiting me and some sort of entropy, if you will. Things that might be related to what we call health. Okay, and the last age is tertiary, which is when entropy is at its peak. What has happened. So we want to know what is normative and what isn't normative. Um, Most people that are older are in good shape. Okay, and wind up being in good shape for the bulk of their age. So you can stand to uh, think about that in a positive way. But what I think is important in a course like this is for you to realize that right now is the time to do things that will help you to live a rich, fulfilling, and meaningful life, and to live a life that's long, if you will. Okay? And you do that by doing several things. And I'm going to just say a couple of things that I think are important. Um, Eating well is important. And I will say more about that on some other occasion. But do not eat things that will harm you, that have no nutritional value if you can. Uh, at least cut down on them, okay? Um, Eat things that will fortify your body, okay? So that's one thing. If you also use alcohol and cigarettes, and I'm not going to be your parent to tell you that you need to stop doing that, but I am going to tell you that there are harmful effects to that. lesser is better, and cigarettes definitely among the more prevalent ones that affect people's health, if you will, across the board, because it affects systemically. And of course, alcohol, you don't want to abuse it. Nothing wrong with some wine and something along those lines, but doing that. If you don't exercise or you don't walk or you don't do things that stretch you out, like maybe yoga, if you don't go out for brisk walk, maybe lifting weights, maybe not 500 pounds, but maybe lifting things that will help you, walking, going up and down stairs. These are all things that can stand to help you if you start doing them now, long-term wise. The effect isn't immediate, but does help you. Okay, so I just wanted to say that so you would know about that. Okay, of course, in terms of defining age, we talk about the chronology, which is, you know, whatever you see me be, but also there's a psychological age. You know, how do I feel psychologically? You know, some people like me are feeling a lot younger, and most of us actually don't even think that we're aging. When we think about ourselves, we think of ourselves as, wow, I still feel real young. You ask older folks, and they'll tell you that. Okay, and of course, the social cultural age thing has to do with things like the education and the work that you do, and things of that. So this topic is related to emerging adulthood, which is a topic that I taught some time back, which suggests that what's happening demographically speaking in the country is that um, teenagers used to kind of leave home and and go to work and get married. Well, the age of teenagerness has been moving steadily forward. Um, and now we, instead of speaking of just teenagers, we're talking about emerging adulthood because people are hanging around, if you will, without doing the things that sociologically were expected of them in the past, um, to the age of 25, 28, 30. That's when people tend to feel like they are okay to move on out. Now, that's not true of everyone, but there seems to be a sizable amount of the population that um, falls into this emerging adulthood perspective. So not fully teenagers, if you will. Well, fully teenagers, but not fully adults is what I mean. Okay. All right. So between 30 and 45, we refer to as established adulthood. Okay. So I wanted to at least go through some of that. Um, Topic that comes up is nature nurture. We study that in psychology and we attempt to make some headways into, is it nature, is it nurture? You know, am I the way I am because of some genetic predisposition? And there is no doubt that there is genetic uh, disposition to different things that happen to me. But you know, is it nature nurture? I could definitely tell you that if I do things that are harmful to me, my good genetics is not going to help me. So do good, be good to yourself, I guess is what I'm saying, and do some of the things that I mentioned if you can. All right, so we also talk about not only nurture and nature nurture, but we also talk about stability and how stable. And people are generally stable. And I have also mentioned in passing the topic of plasticity, which suggests that the brain rewires. And in fact, when we talk about neuropsychology in a little bit, which I'm not going to bore you totally with, I'm going to talk a little bit about it, some points that I think are important to make. The neurons themselves, the very special cells that are only found in the brain, they recalibrate themselves to take on. And the reason that people that have strokes learn to use that arm again really well is that those neurons that are found in the brain that were not helping with the arm movement, all of a sudden get assigned to do that by the brain, okay, if you will. And that's what I call it. So that's a good thing. So we are hardwired to be successful at most of what we do. And so I'll say that. All right. So I want to go back just very briefly to the scientific stuff that we are going to be studying, because in reality, the book, I have the hardcover, and I also have the electronic copy. But whichever one you get, I'm not going to tell you which one to get, because it's up to you to get which one and what works for you. Okay, but and within the economics of what you're dealing with. So I want to talk about that. In that book, there's going to be a lot of science, if you will. Now, some of it is going to be repetitive, or it's going to be expanded upon, and I think that's the way that we try to scalpel, to build upon the knowledge that we have, so that we learn about what this whole aging is all about. So the way we do research is that we have to talk to people many times, and human beings talk versus other beings on the planet who might do some different types of noises, which don't know that you would call it talking, but they might communicate among themselves. But we tend to talk. That's quite different. And in fact, humans are hardwired to talk from birth, even if they speak French. Parlez-vous français? Hablas español? Those are things that culturally we learn, and that are things that we do as a matter of course, if you will. Okay. Anyway, we study this field. We do research, means we try to find out hidden things, scientifically speaking, and we study these things using a scientific method, if you will. Okay. We need to know if something that we're finding out is reliable. Am I studying the right thing? What is it that I'm studying? So, and my findings, are they reliable? Can I use that information so that I know more about it, and that I can in some way articulate that to others so that others can use it? So is it reliable? Am I measuring the right thing? Okay, so validity is the other term that comes up. So we have reliability. Is it reliable? Can I rely on that information, if you will? And there are tests. This is not a course about test and measurements, so we're not going to talk about that. But is it valid? Okay, and so we do systematic studies to do that. We do surveys. We do naturalistic and structured studies, which sometimes are called experiments, if you will. And it is hard to do experiments. Experiments are difficult. So we do a lot of what's called microgenetic studies. These are long-term questionnaires that we gather information for certain periods of time, and we try to see if we can know something about a certain cohort of people from 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 40 to 50, things like that. Okay, so these are samplings. We cannot know everything about any one specific group, and we can also only know about things that we explore, that people share with us through, as you would probably guess, called self-reports. All right. But the important thing is that we want it to be a representative sampling, and that's what we attempt to do in this field. We might study case studies. Case studies are you study me, and if you've taken a course in personality, you remember that Freud studied case studies, and he uh, created whole personality theories on that. That is not a reliable way to do it, though it is interesting. All right. So we look at as many individuals as we can to gather information and do statistical analysis. And statistics is a whole ball of wax that deals with that. So we look at age effects within subjects, within cohorts. We study time measurement effects, if you will, what happens through time. Um, Part of what happens is that we might have confounding things that we can't know why they happen in experiments, but we try to eliminate those. So experimentation has to do with that. And if I do a study and you do a study, let's say this whole group that's with me today does some sort of study, I might do to collect some of the information because you might use different methods of gathering information. You might use different statistics, call something they call meta-analysis, okay? And so I might just try to crunch all the data differently, okay? Also, I might try to generalize this information, okay? So that's what I wanted to say about this in terms of what we are doing in this course in terms of at least an introduction. I want to open this up to ask if there are any questions that you might have. No? No questions? All right. All right. Well, so I'm gonna move on to talk a little bit about neuropsychology, if you will. Let me see what I can tell you about that. What is it? Well, it is the study of the brain, if you will. Okay, and the brain is an interesting thing. It's in reality, the brain is a biological thing that is sort of computer-like, if you will. Okay, we don't necessarily know as much about the brain as we would want to know, but we know some of what we, you know, and when you look at the textbook, you'll see, and you'll probably say to yourself, "Oh my God, there is so much to know about the brain," and I'm just kind of getting into it. So I wanted to tell you that there are secrets to be known about the brain. Okay, and we use a scientific method to try to find this out. So we try to find out about what happens with people that are older, if you will, and what happens. Well, we do know that certain things do happen to people in their brain, and sometimes their brain does atrophy, if you will. Okay, the brain, if you look at it physically, is a small organ in comparison to some of the other organs in the body, and so it weighs about 3 pounds, and it's squishy, if you will, and it is in a way floating in this fluid um, in your head. Excuse me, in your head, that we don't know as much as we would like to know about it. Okay, um, I did want to say that the brain is perhaps computer-like, and some people study it from the perspective, neuropsychologists study it from that perspective, in terms of that the brain is the executive of the human person, and that is true. The brain is like that. It is the thing that makes us move, and we can see it. We can see it when we look at the brain in terms of the functional MRIs, as they're called, CAT scans, if you will, and we study it because, well, we can, if you will. We are able to know a little bit about it. All right. So how do we do neuropsychology? I already mentioned some of the topics that and some of the ways that we do this. All right. So what happens to the brain is that it does mature, it does grow, it does in some way it grows with us. Okay, so brains that don't grow don't mature, and brains that don't mature create problems for people. Okay, learning occurs in the brain, and so we want to be able to have a good brain. I mentioned drinking, and I mentioned smoking of various types. I mentioned the eating. Well, all of that affects the brain, and so we want to be able to, in some way, give the brain what it needs, because it's connected to our body. Okay. All right. In terms of what we're talking about the science of what's called neuroscience. Okay. It helps us to learn a little bit about what aging is all about. So when you read the chapter, you'll know about major imaging techniques that I've mentioned some. Talk about some theories, excuse me. And so you'll learn a little bit about that. So neural anatomy is the topic at hand, is the study of how the brain is put together. And if I took anyone's brain in this class, and I took it out of your head, and I unfolded it, if you will, because it's folded, I could fold it in front of a table that's about 3 or 4 feet this way, and about 2 or 3 feet this way, and it would cover that whole area. Okay. But lucky for you, you don't have to carry your brain around on a table. You carry it inside your brain, and it flows in there nicely, and it's covered in a way that it doesn't get harmed. And so that's a good thing. All right. So the brain is involved in being in your head, and that's why when people have accidents that you probably are aware of, when people have accidents and they break their head, if you will, and it, unfortunately, there's an intrusion into it. Microorganisms get in, or part of your head might become available outside, if you will. That's a problem. But since it isn't like that normally, we've got a pretty hard head. That's a good thing. All right. And that's a good thing for us. All right. So neuroscience is the study of that. Okay. We have structured neural imaging. We have functional MRIs, as they're called, that are done by technicians. So neuropsychology studies aging, and among other things, from the perspective of what's called a neuropsychological approach, neural coordinational or correlational. Correlations are statistical analysis that suggests that some things have relations but don't have necessary causes that cause them among them. We also study it through activation to look at images that suggest that to us. So neuropsychology helps us in that perspective. perspective, if you will. All right. So what are the advantages of studying this? Well, we know that it's important to know about what's happening in the brain. The brain is made of neurons, like I mentioned before. They're made of what's called dendrites and axons and neural fibers, if you will. And they travel throughout many, many, many miles, if you will. If you ever get a chance to take a course in neuropsychology, not only will it be challenging, but it'll be interesting enough for you to do that. All right. And you'll learn that there's an area of neuropsychology that deals with aging. Okay. Okay. So what happens? In the brain, as we get older, the brain gets a little smaller, not significantly smaller, but it gets smaller. The number of neurons, which are specialized cells that are found nowhere else but in the brain, decline. The size and the dendrites themselves decrease. Things called tangles developed. They're kind of tides, if you will. They're deposits of different chemicals, proteins, if you will. The number of intersynaptic connections also tend to dissipate. So these are gradual. Something called white matter hyperintensities do come up in functional MRIs. A little later today, I think it'll be a little later, you'll get an announcement with a link that you can check up on a very interesting video about this and what it is that the brain is kind of grayish in the outside and inside is white. But when we put people's brains live, if you will, little things pop up like this and so on. So you'll see white reflections, and the more white reflections you see, the more problems that someone has in the center of their brain. The carotid arteries go through here, and in the center of my brain, you might see these things. Well, I'm not saying that I have them, and I hope I don't, but there's a normal amount of that in all brains. But if I get a lot of them, I am in trouble, if you will. All right. So, damage in the brain in that area particularly is detrimental. All right. So I just wanted to say that. So I encourage you to watch that video because I think even though it's done by an ophthalmologist, which is an eye doctor, because the eye is part of the brain, they've done a better job than most people, I think, in terms of talking about that. All right. There are abnormal processes, if you will, in terms of serotonin. So I wanted to say that that happens. There are positive effects. Older people have more meaning and significance and have the theory of mind, if you will, as it's called, is more positive. Brains are more efficient. Older brains are generally more efficient than younger brains, if you will, to a certain stage. All right. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the theory of mind, which is the ability to understand what others' beliefs and the viewpoints are all about. I think that's an important concept in this study, if you will. Okay, linked to changes in the brain are emotion, of course. Fully developed brains have better regulation, and with older age, it looks like people are able to regulate their emotions a little bit better. Those of you that recently have been teenagers realize that as you get older, you tend to have better control of your life. And so I think that's true as we get older. The other thing that happens with older age people is that they tend to, in some way, use more of their brain, if you will. A lot of people always talk about that you use only part of your brain. That's not really true. We use most of our brain. It's kind of like, you know how your computer in the background has these different softwares that are not readily available to you at any one time in the screen? Well, that's how the brain works. Okay, so I wanted to say that. So the aging brain tends to use the frontal part and then sort of tries to elicit and bring and call into action other areas of the brain. So it becomes in a way, I think it's more efficient from that perspective. Okay. All right. So we have the type of cells that help us. I wanted to say that. Um, what else did I wanted to say? In the book, you'll read about the parietal-frontal integration theory, which suggests that intelligence comes from a distribution of integrating networks in that area and in the frontal area. So two areas that help us. Okay. So I wanted to say that. You'll see that different areas activate when you use different types of neuropsychological, biological tests to help us, okay? Um, and it really just helps us see what the brain, how it's working, okay, how it's working. So it's not a neuropsychology course, so we're not gonna talk a whole lot about these things, but I did want to re-mention before I sign out. um, Plasticity is important. Neural stem cells give rise to new different neurons. So that's a good thing for all of us, if you will. So I wanted to say that, okay, that this helps us. I don't want to say too much more. I want you to read the chapter on neuropsychology because there's a whole lot to be said there. But the brain works as a unit, and different parts have certain focus. The frontal lobe thinking, the executive part, the back part, the cerebellum back here has to do with movement. So when I'm hitting the ball with my bat, using that part. The center part has to do with the emotions. It controls some of the sleeping and the thinking is spread out. There are a couple of areas that have to do with language. One is called the Broca area, and that's important. There's a hearing section, though there are certain areas that specialize in that. Really, the whole brain works as a unit to help each of those things that we do become effective. And as we age, some of that effectiveness, particularly well into the 80s and the 90s, if you will, some of those things tend to become less. Okay, so I wanted to say some of this to you. All right. So I'm going to stop here and ask you if you have any questions or anything like that.
I think the only question I have is regarding the discussion posts. Like, what is your expectations for like the length of it? Like, is there like a requirement how long it needs to be, or just however we can answer it?
Um, I just wanted to make sense to you. It doesn't have to be any specific length, but I hope that you'll give it and turn in a reasonably well thought out and comprehensive. That doesn't mean 20 pages, doesn't mean 5 pages. Enough, maybe a paragraph and a half that is not giant, but good enough.
Okay.
That answers the question and that you feel good about. I don't know if that, you know, I'm not going to be difficult in, in grading, if you will. I want you to feel like you're learning because you are learning, and I can't expect you to be a PhD student. Okay, So Nina, I don't know if that's helpful to you.
Yeah, I understand now. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? This is your time. Can I ask if this time works for you? Is there a better time for me to connect with you guys in the day? I'm sorry? I didn't hear. All right. So
It
I
worked.
didn't hear, so I don't know. This works? Okay. If it works, okay. I will do something not next week, but maybe the week after that, and we'll talk about those chapters. So I leave it to you to look at the PowerPoint, the videos. I picked some videos that I think will be helpful to you. I know that you may not watch everything in the video, but watch the bulk of the videos, if you will. Read the book. The book is helpful from that, if you will, or the link that provides materials to the book. I hope that you hang with me. If you hang with me, we're going to be all right. I'll say that, you know, I try to work with everyone, and I try to help everyone be successful in the course and learn. I think this is a learning course versus I'm going to try to catch you. I'm not doing well. All right. Does anyone else have anything else to say? If you don't, then I'm gonna let you go because I promised that I was going to talk for about an hour, and I'm just about there. I didn't want to go on to in real detail with anything because I think the book does a good job in that. And if you have questions in the future on any of this topic or future topics, bring those ideas in your mind, and I will try to address them. All right. Again, welcome to our course. All right. Thank you for coming and being part of this course. And it's all going to be good. Okay. So I'm going to sign out if no one says anything in the next 2 to 10 seconds.
Have a good day, Professor.
You too. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. And we will see you. Anybody else? All right. Take care now.